Wine hesitantly stepped forward with a lower head, holding 𝐊's hand as her leg hadn't recovered. Mrs. Kim stared at her. Seems like you are quite injured. Wine nodded, biting her lips. My caretaker needs a caretaker as well. Wine released her hand and limped towards Mrs. Kim. I don't know if 𝐊 has told you or not that how we got married. Mrs. Kim glanced at 𝐊 and shook her head in denial. I would like to know. He waved it whenever I tried to ask him. She said, passing a glare at 𝐊. It's okay, I'll tell you. Leave it, it's not necessary now. Wine shook her head in denial. It is necessary. She fixed her gaze on Mrs. Kim. You would hate me more after knowing what I have done to your son. Mrs. Kim stared at her confusingly. I accused him of assaulting me sexually. You might understand the rest as you know how religious react after that. Mrs. Kim stared at her with shock. She was speechless. 𝐊 shook his head and let out a sigh. I thought you were innocent little girl. She muttered and glanced at 𝐊. I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. He crouched down to her and held her hands. You don't have to apologize to me, Mom. He kissed her hands. Mrs. Kim shook her head with teary eyes. You have been through so much. I don't know what to say, she cried. Wine bit her lips and lowered her head. It has happened, Mom, and we can't change it. Don't cry, please. He embraced her in a hug. Wine held back her tears. I wish she wasn't your wife. You hadn't married her. I would have skinned her alive. She muttered furiously, glaring at Wine. I'm still your caretaker. You can do whatever you want to do to me. I know I deserve it and nothing can justify my actions. Mrs. Kim looked away, breaking the hug. Even if I don't accept it, you are now this house daughter-in-law. I can't forgive you, at least not now. She looked at 𝐊. I want some time alone. 𝐊 nodded and stood while Mrs. Kim dragged away her wheelchair. He turned towards Wine. It wasn't the right time to speak. She looked at him. The right time will never come. The time that passes and remains in the past is always the right time. Maybe Mom will forgive you after we get married again. She can't be angry for the rest of her life. Wine nodded and held his hand. I don't want to marry you again yet. I want to be your mom's caretaker. 𝐊 frowned and released his hand from her grip. What do you mean? I want to continue my studies and experience many other things. I want to get more mature until I marry you again. He moved closer to her. I'll get your admission done. Wine shook her head in denial and placed her hand on his cheek. I want to do it by myself. I want to stand on my own without relying on anyone. Please. 𝐊 let out a sigh. Please, she said again. Okay, fine, now let's go, you need rest. He held her hand and helped her walk to her room. Few days later, Wine has recovered and resumed her work. Mrs. Kim is cold and distant towards her, but Wine doesn't blame her knowing she is the culprit of her son. She got admitted to the university. Now Mrs. Kim had gone to the hospital with 𝐊 as she had an appointment for her leg. Wine was alone at the house when the maid came to her saying someone was there to meet her. She was surprised to see her sister. Only, she said and rushed to hug her. Wine, how are you? Wine broke the hug and smiled. I'm good, how did you come? Where are the kids? Wine sat her and asked. Kids are at home. Lindy held her hand. Orion told me about your accident. She said in a low tone. Wine nodded. That's not a big deal, I'm fine now. Lindy smiled through teary eyes. I wish I could have been a better sister to you. Mom will be disappointed in me. I still remember how eagerly she was waiting to see you and hold you, but Destiny had other plans. She whispered. Wine broke into tears. I didn't mean to make you cry, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. It's just that I would have been a different person if Mom was still there. My life would have been totally different. At least I wouldn't have ruined someone's life by my impulsive move. Lindy patted her hand. 𝐊 is a dumb Wine. If it was someone else in his place, he wouldn't have forgiven you. Wine nodded with a smile. Indeed he is. I want to clear his name in front of the villagers and confess my sin. You can't do that, Wine. It will ruin Dad's reputation. You have no idea how they will turn Dad and Dad will come to kill you. But what about 𝐊? I have to clear his name even if it takes my life. I don't care. She was adamant about her decision. It just slipped out of my mind. Orion will get married soon. You and I will go to see the little girl. Orion will shift to the city with Dad. You can go to the village. Then as for Dad, Orion up Mrs. Kim and went back to the office. Mrs. Kim met Lindy way too nicely. Later at night, Wayne didn't have dinner as she was waiting to eat with him. The door opened and closed, indicating he was back. "Why are you still awake?" he asked as his eyes landed on her. She smiled and reached out to him. "I was waiting for you. Did you have dinner?" she asked, engulfing him in a hug. "No." She kissed him on the cheek and pulled out. "Go and change, then we'll eat together. I have taken out your clothes." "How many times have I told you not to wait for me until this hour?" She raised her brows and glanced at the wall clock. "You're making it sound like it's midnight. I can wait for you the whole night. Waiting up to 12 p.m. is nothing," she said, shrugging her shoulders. He shook his head and made his way towards the bedroom. "I'm coming in 5 minutes," he muttered before walking away. In 5 minutes, he was in the dining room across her. He was having small talks and eating while Wayne was staring at him intently. "Why aren't you eating?" he asked, raising his brows. Wayne let out a sigh and placed her hand under her chin. "I'm eating," she muttered, staring at him affectionately. Thane's lips curled up into a smirk. "You're eating me through your eyes. I know I'm handsome. It's not your fault to gawk at me." Wayne chuckled. "Indeed, you're handsome. All right, now eat or else I'm also not eating." She nodded and began munching on her meal. "Only came today," she spoke after a while. Thane was done eating. He passed her a questioning gaze. "It's brother's wedding soon." "Nice, when is it?" "In a month or so. Dad will move in with my brother in a few days and I'll go to the village and tell the truth to everyone," she said in a low tone. "No need to bother," he said sternly. "I want to clear your name and confess my sin." "That's of no use. I have nothing to do with the villagers." She held his hand. "But I do. I want to make it right. I can't spend the rest of my life with regret. When we get married, I expected you to kill me or at least torture me to death. But you did nothing, causing me to fall into the depths of regret." He chuckled. "Why did you think that?" "You were dangerously angry." She kissed his hands, then nodded. "I was angry. If you weren't my wife, I would have filed a case against you, but then you had my name with you, and at least you were ashamed of accusing me." She smiled faintly. "I don't deserve you. I wish I could change the past. But we can't change it, so let it be. I'm not allowing you to go to that village, that's it." He released his hands from her grip and patted her head. Wayne remained silent and barely nodded. Time skipped. Lindy informed Wayne when their dad moved with Orion. Wayne thought a lot about it, but then she decided that she would go to the village and do as she said. With Cassian's help, she first went to meet Estelle and her dad. After revealing the truth to them, she went to the village with a thumping heart. She confessed that she had falsely alleged him, to which the villagers acted aggressively, but Cassian helped her out of that. As soon as she returned home, she found Thane already waiting for her furiously. From Estelle's dad, he got to know about Wayne's meeting as Raven apologized to him. Thane knew Wayne must have gone to the village as well, so he asked her and she tried to explain, but Thane walked out angrily. It's been a few days since all these things happened and Thane was completely ignoring her. Now, as usual, Wayne was waiting for Thane, but there was no trace of him. She called him several times and at first he declined the call. Later, he switched off his phone. Wayne glanced at the wall clock. It was past 2 a.m. She was about to doze off when the main door creaked open, revealing Thane. She swiftly stood. "Why are you so late? I called you several times, but you didn't answer." He closed the door and passed her a cold stare. "What do you think I do?" he said and made his way to his bedroom when Wayne grabbed him by the arm. "Did you hiccup in? I had dinner." She released his hand. "Okay." He walked to his bedroom while Wayne made her way to the dining room. She kept away the dishes that she had served for herself and Thane. With a sigh, she walked to the kitchen and kept the food in the fridge. She made Thane's night tea and made her way to his bedroom. She entered after knocking on the door. "Your tea," she muttered and placed it on the coffee table. Thane remained silent, scrolling through his phone. Wayne stared at his back and tears rolled down her cheeks. She mustered up the courage and moved closer to him, pressing her head against his back and wrapping her arms around his torso. Thane stood still and kept away his phone. "I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't have disobeyed you, but that was necessary. I didn't want to be in guilt for the rest of my life." He felt his shirt getting wet. He let out a sigh and held her hands. He turned around but Wine was holding him tightly. I won't leave even if you push me or throw me out. She pressed more onto him. Okay, stop crying. He released from her grip and cupped her face. Please try to understand, it was important, at least for my peace of mind. She cried, holding his hands. I get it. Are you still mad at me? He shook his head in denial and smiled. She hugged him. Don't ignore me again. I promise I will do as you say. He kissed her temple and pulled out. Alright, enough of weeping and sobbing. Let's go, you haven't eaten yet. Not now, your tea is getting cold. She held his hand and dragged him towards the couch. She sat him and handed him the tea. Why don't you move to my room? She sat beside him and snuggled close to him. Nice idea, but I must ask your mom first. She placed her chin on his shoulder and wrapped her arm around his elbow. Mom wouldn't say anything. What if she feels it's inappropriate? She might not like it. He hummed a response. Then how did you feel after learning about my accident? She sat straight and asked. He kept away the mug and fixed his gaze on her. I felt numb. I don't even remember how I went to the hospital. Seeing your condition made it worse. I didn't think the feeling of losing you would be so hurtful until you disappeared from the hospital. The agony I have been through is indescribable. He wrapped his arm around her and pulled her closer as if he was living the moment. How did your mom react? She placed her head on his shoulder. Mom cried aloud. Do you like me? She curled up close to him. When I introduced you as mom's caretaker and left you here, life wasn't same without you. I didn't realize I was addicted to you. I tried not to miss you and tried to let that feeling go, but in the end, you were always on my mind. One smiled and snuggled into his neck. I might have come back to the village if that incident hadn't happened. I'm sorry. She placed a soft kiss on his neck. It's okay, that chapter has closed. She nodded, rubbing her nose over his neck. They both spent the night cuddled up and talking. Few years later. Over a few years, Mrs. Kim forgave Wine. Wine didn't hear anything from her father. Thang and her bond grew stronger while they lived happily. Now it's been a few days since Wine had returned from the hospital as she gave birth to the baby girl. Due to excessive bleeding, her condition was critical and she was in ICU. Dylan, please come here, let me dry your hair. She called out her 3-year-old son. No, I want to see the baby. He shook his head, causing his cheeks to bounce. Baby's with Grandma. We will go once I dry your hair. See, honey, I can't run after you, she said, walking towards him. No, he stretched the no and ran out while Wine followed him. Wine, leave Dylan to me and hold her, she's asleep. Wine held her daughter with a smile while Dylan hugged Mrs. Kim's knees. Grandma chocolate. He stretched out his hand to her. Mrs. Kim and Wine chuckled when the maid came and said someone was there to meet Wine. I'll dry Dylan's hair so you can go. Wine nodded and walked to the guest room. As soon as she entered, her eyes widened with surprise and then welled up with tears. Dad, she barely whispered and stepped forward. Mr. Chui clenched and unclenched his fist. Wine stood confusingly, not knowing what to say until Miss Chui mustered up the courage and spoke. I wanted to see you. She passed him a questioning gaze. Orion said you were hospitalized. She nodded, holding back her tears, and moved closer to him. But I didn't die. I don't want you to die. I have seen your mom die in this way. He mumbled and averted his gaze at the baby in her arms. Your daughter. Yes, he smiled, staring at her. Do you want to hold her? Can I? Why not? She smiled through teary eyes and passed her to Mr. Chui. The little girl smiled in her sleep, causing them to chuckle. After a while, Wine broke silence. I didn't kill Mom. Mr. Chui avoided her gaze. I know, that was just my mentality. I still can't forget her. I can't take it anymore. He said in a low tone. The maid came with snacks while Mr. Chui gave the baby to Wine, and she laid her on the sofa gently. Can I ask forgiveness? She looked at him surprised and opened her mouth to speak, but the door burst open, revealing Dylan. Mama, baby, he stopped midway saying Mr. Chui. Grandpa, he said with surprise and looked at his mom to confirm it. Yes, Grandpa. He smiled widely and ran towards Mr. Chui. Hello, Grandpa, I'm Dylan, he said and climbed onto Mr. Chui's lap. Mr. Chui was still surprised. Mama told me you would would come one day. You know me? He nodded. Mama showed me your picture. Mr. J looked at Wine. Grandpa, Mama said you were mad at her, that's why you didn't come to see us. Mama will say sorry, please don't be mad at her, she loves you so much. Wine smiled faintly. Mr. J kissed him on the chubby cheeks. I'm not mad anymore, we are good. Dylan clapped his tiny chubby hands. Now I can meet you and Mama will not cry seeing your picture anymore. Mr. J blinked away his tears. Yes, we'll meet often. He looked at Wine. He's quite a sensible kid. Yeah, he is. Dylan, baby, go and bring your toys. Dylan jumped off Mr. J's lap. Grandpa will show you my toys. He ran out of the room. I'm sorry, Wine. First time in his life he said her name. Wine let her tears flow freely. Mr. J stood and patted her head. He was about to move back, but Wine stood and hugged him. Mr. J embraced her hesitantly. A sense of relief washed over him while Wine cried, feeling her father's touch for the first time in her life. I'm sorry, he kept mumbling. Someone cleared their throat. They broke the hug, wiping their tears. Father-in-law, he said, coming forward and glanced at Wine's teary face. Mrs. Kim also came and met Mr. Chui. They had a conversation together while Wine insisted Mr. Chui on having lunch with them. Dylan brought all his toys and scattered them. Haven't you named her yet? Wine shook her head in denial. I have thought of a name, but if you have one in mind, please tell me. Mr. Chui smiled. I do. He glanced at the baby and then at Wine. Zelia. Wine smiled widely. I had thought of it too, she said in a low tone. The maid called them out as the lunch was ready. Mrs. Kim, Mr. Chui and Wine made their way out, but Than stopped Wine. What's with these tears just because of a name? He pulled her closer and wiped her face. It's my mom's name. Are you fine with it? I'm fine with anything as long as you're happy. She pressed her forehead against his. I'm happy. She kissed him on the lips. Thank you for everything. Thanks to you, he said and pulled her into a passionate